Good morning, everybody. My name is Aria Chambers. I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. A few notices before we begin. First, if you're joining the webinar via mobile device, please note that you'll have the option of viewing either a panelist or the presentation, and you can change your view by swiping left or right on your screen. And second, we encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar using the questions chat section on your devices. At the end of the presentation, I'll read out your questions for panelists to answer. Today's webinar is brought to you by Repair Technology and Banks Industrial Group. Repair Technology is a Belzona Authorized Distributor and provides solutions that repair, protect, and improve facilities and equipment against abrasion, erosion, corrosion, chemical attack, and more. And Banks Industrial Group is the one-stop shop for all industrial maintenance services, including thermal insulation, protective coatings, concrete repairs, which we'll go over today, stair and platform solutions, and we also have a skilled field team that's trained in applying Belzona products. With us today, we have AJ Patel and Jason Klein. AJ is our business development manager and Jason is our sales manager. Later on during Q&A, we'll bring on Mark Borski, who's our technical manager, and he'll assist in answering your questions. For today's webinar, we're going to go through the benefits and limitations of concrete, problem areas with concrete, and then we'll use some real-life examples from Banks Industrial Group applications that we've done in the past. We'll wrap up the webinar with a Q&A. And with that, I'll pass it over to AJ to get us started.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Happy Thursday, right before this long weekend. So let's start it off good. We'll talk a little bit about concrete, as Aria mentioned. So why are we talking about concrete? Because it's quite possibly the most abundant construction material used on the planet. It's literally everywhere. Anything you want to build, it starts with concrete. If you want to build a home, you're going to have a concrete foundation. You want to build a large skyscraper, concrete's going to be involved with it. It's going to be involved with the foundation, the floors. You want to build steps to get in any of these buildings, concrete. You work at a chemical plant, you work at a warehousing facility, you have dock space, it's all concrete. If you work in hospitals, all your flooring is made of concrete and they have expansion joints between them. So it's everywhere. And why is it everywhere? Because it's cheap. It's its greatest benefit is cheap. It's so plentiful that it just makes sense to utilize it in every way that we can. However, it's got a huge limitation. So I often say your greatest strength is your weakness. Well, because it's cheap, the problem is ultimately when it comes to concrete, you can't repair concrete with concrete. It doesn't work. It doesn't bond correctly with itself. And so today's webinar is all about talking about the different ways concrete can fail and then having a conversation about, hey, how do I go about repairing it? And so there's a key activity involved in that, which is if you have a warehouse, if you have a chemical plant, if you have a wastewater treatment facility, any sort of office building, you have to inspect your concrete. So that's one of the key activities that is involved with everything we're going to talk about. So I'm going to go through some examples of the things you can find. Later on, Jason's going to go through examples of ways that we've repaired it. But the key here is you want to inspect your concrete. So before we go any further, today's conversation, as I mentioned, is about concrete and repairing it. Our recommended solution for repairing concrete is to utilize the Belzona epoxy solution. So we can talk about what they're made of and what they're different, where they're different. However, let's start off with where they're the same. So whether you're using concrete or epoxy, they both contain aggregates, and aggregates are kind of that larger stone you see embedded in concrete. It's ultimately what gives it its strength. It's ultimately what helps it take on some of that compression that it takes on. Great thing about aggregate, this is why concrete's so cheap. It's everywhere. The entire earth is made of rocks. So it's very, very plentiful. This is where it gets a little different though. So if you took a bunch of stones and you put them together, they would fall apart, right? So you want to have some sort of binding agent for it. So in the case of concrete, the binding agent is cement and water. And cement is generally made of limestone, made of sand, different elements put together. And then we use water as a way to kind of get these elements to react to each other chemically. We mix in the aggregate, we pour it into a form, and boom, you've got concrete. It takes a while to set, but that's what the result is. With an epoxy, with the Belzona epoxy concrete repair solution, we don't use cement and water. What we actually use is a resin and a solidifier. So what those two do is you put them together, and just like the cement and water, there's a chemical reaction, with the exception that we can control what type of resin and solidifier we use. So now we can control the time it takes for it to cure. We could take advantage of that and utilize it in some chemical applications where you might need some chemical resistance. So those are kind of the different ways that you're going to see the concrete and epoxy differ. Some quick facts in terms of, tail of the tape. When you want to use concrete, you're going to need like 3 to 5 inches in terms of minimum thickness. With the Belzona, we can feather it down to 0. We utilize the Belzona to actually repair concrete. Why? Because it has excellent adhesion to the concrete as compared to concrete with itself. We can cure in as little as a few hours versus several weeks. We have over double the compressive strength. And if you need to form the Belzona, you don't necessarily need reinforcement behind it, such as rebar or framing or wire framing, in order to make it work. So a couple of problems associated with concrete. Some of the things you want to look for as you're doing your own inspection or you have somebody come in to look at it. Some of the things we'll look at: freeze thaw. So what is that? Well, concrete sits on the earth, and the earth, we all know, moves. So when the earth moves, the concrete's going to crack because it's very rigid. And so it takes in the energy by cracking apart. And what happens is that when it rains or when it snows, the water, the moisture works its way into the concrete. And when you go through the freeze thaw cycle where things turn to ice, we all know that water expands. And so now it's trapped inside the concrete, it starts expanding. And what happens is over time, it starts breaking apart the concrete from the inside out. So when you look at this, this looks like a clarifying tank at a wastewater treatment plant where the concrete essentially spalled. In this picture over here to the right, you have some steps. Again, the same thing. Water makes its way in there. It freezes, it thaws, it creates bigger gaps, and boom, eventually it's just going to break apart. Shrinkage. This is another issue. Now, I want to be careful here. Whenever you set concrete, it's going to shrink. Why? Because there's water in it, and some of that water is going to evaporate. In this case, what we're talking about is having water that evaporates too quickly, or having too much water and then even that evaporating out. And what happens is whatever your original form was, when the moisture leaves it too rapidly, it's going to shrink, and it's going to shrink more than the area, too much more than the area that you need to cover. And what's going to happen is you're going to develop cracks, and it's ultimately going to fail. And we just talked about what happens when you allow moisture to work its way into cracks. You then expose yourself to bigger problems. So we talked earlier about concrete and the need for reinforcement. So that reinforcement often comes in the form of, say, rebar, and that's carbon steel. And so what do we know about carbon steel? When it hits moisture and oxygen, CO2, guess what? You're going to end up with some corrosion that's going to happen. So if you look in these pictures down here, before the corrosion, everything looks great, fine, dandy, we're okay. All of a sudden you got some moisture that's working its way into that carbon steel, and there's oxygen, there's other things reacting in there. You start getting some corrosion, and that corrosion material starts building up over time, and it'll lead to cracks, it'll lead to surface stains, but eventually what's going to happen is it's going to spall. The concrete's no longer going to have anything to bond to, and it's going to get pushed out because of those corrosion products. And what you're going to end up with then is a large exposed area in your concrete. Abrasion. So abrasion is the act of constantly rubbing against something, and what's going to happen is over time you start wearing away because of the abrasion. You start wearing away the surface of the concrete. You start working your way into the middle of the concrete. If you look at this picture, you can see all these stones. That's what I talked about earlier. As far as the aggregate, you start exposing some of that. You see it here. And when you start exposing that, you start exposing more of the pore areas where there's pores. You start exposing the rebar, you start exposing some of the elements inside the concrete, and guess what happens? Moisture starts penetrating, you get the issue of carbonization, freeze thaw, everything we talked about earlier. Chemical attacks. So, concrete is alkaline by nature. We talked earlier before, you have limestone, that sort of material, so it's very alkaline. And so when you take something that's very alkaline and there's a chemical that is very acidic, guess what? Not a good combination at all. You want to avoid that at all costs. But unfortunately, we use concrete as secondary containment, as for chemical applications. And so when you do have contact, you end up seeing a lot of failure. So like you look down here, you can see where the concrete ultimately failed. The other pictures show the same. So you want to do your best to preserve the concrete from that. impact, just like everything else that you can think of. When you slam one object into another, something's going to give, energy is going to disperse, things are going to break apart. Concrete is no different. So we see this a lot. Loading docks are a great example of trucks backing in, hitting the concrete, it starts breaking apart, you start exposing the rebar, then you expose yourself to carbonization, you expose yourself to freestyle. So it's all kind of a cyclical thing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and play a video, just so everybody knows. It's about 3 minutes. It may come across somewhat, spotty at times, but just hang in there. It's got some really great information about Belzona and how it kind of performs versus concrete. And then after the video, I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to our sales manager, Jason, who's going to go into some details around some of the repair jobs that we've actually done in the past. Okay.
Concrete is the most widely used construction material in the world. As a consequence, concrete damage and deterioration are perhaps the biggest problems encountered by buildings and structures. From floors and steps to walls and roofs, the effects of damage are clear to see across multiple areas. But is more concrete really the answer? As an alternative to like-for-like repairs, Belzona offers a variety of polymeric mortar repair and protection solutions. These materials offer superior application and performance benefits. In this video, we put some of these to the test. For vertical or overhead applications, concrete is impossible to apply and cure without the use of formers and shuttering. Instead, Belzona's materials can repair the damaged area with minimal support and fully cure without any shuttering. For example, this high-build concrete repair material will not sag, even when applied thickly on vertical or overhead surfaces. The lasting quality of Belzona is better too. All of Belzona's mortar repair systems demonstrate excellent levels of adhesion, even on vertical and overhead surfaces. In fact, Belzona adheres so well that it's stronger than the cohesive strength of concrete. Lightweight properties also make Belzona superior to like-for-like concrete repairs. When fully cured, Belzona's low-density polymeric system weighs significantly less than the equivalent volume of concrete. Lighter materials make applications easier and quicker. Even light pedestrian traffic can result in deterioration over time, yet concrete areas featuring heavy-duty vehicles can be prone to higher levels of wear. Belzona can prevent this problem from reoccurring with rebuild materials that provide long-term resistance to both abrasion and impact. Loading bays and storage areas make excellent examples where these solutions have proved beneficial. Whether exposed to the environment or aggressive chemical contact, Belzona's concrete repair composites are non-porous and do not absorb water or chemicals. This makes them ideally suited to areas subject to chemical attack. In fact, Belzona's range of mortar repair materials and coatings are capable of resisting some of the strongest acids and alkalis used across industries, even at high temperatures. For each application area and service environment, Belzona offers a superior solution to repairing and protecting damaged concrete. And as demonstrated, you can be guaranteed that these benefits will come as standard. Visit belzona.com for more information.
All right, everyone. I hope you learned something in that video. I see Jason has joined us. Jason, welcome. He's going to go ahead and go through some examples and show you a little bit about what else we do here at Repair Technology and Banks Industrial Group. I'll see everyone a little bit later.
Thank you, AJ, for the handoff here. Hopefully everybody can see my screen now. We are going to go through some current applications with Belzona that the Banks Industrial Group has used. Give me 1 second here. So when we talk about Belzona and concrete, AJ alluded to earlier, there are plenty of times where concrete is the right answer. But there's also numerous occasions where a like-for-like solution is not needed and it won't work. We're going to dive into a couple of case studies here that Banks Industrial Group has done with the use of Belzona. And the first thing we're going to go over here is a loading dock repair. If you take a look here at the left-hand side of your screen, you're going to see a typical loading dock. Loading docks are high volume, high traffic areas, trucks backing in and out all day long. And over time, these bumpers here just get pulverized and beat from trucks constantly backing up. You can actually see the concrete here completely failing and falling apart. There's concrete all over the ground. It's completely busting up. And over the trucks, the impact of constantly hitting these bumpers, it eventually has pulverized like a sledgehammer and beat this concrete to fall apart. This particular customer, this loading dock, is high traffic area. It cannot be shut down for any length of period of time. You know, a typical concrete repair of this magnitude, it would be a couple of weeks before it's actually fully cured. Well, Belzona, our cure time is way better than that. What we do is over here on your right-hand side, you're going to see the finished repair. We chipped out all the old concrete, took it all the way down, cleaned it all up, and we put in our Belzona 4000 series epoxy repair mortar, because cure time was essential here. This customer, we went in on a Friday afternoon when they were closed up. We did this repair throughout the late afternoon and early evening, and by Monday morning, they were fully operational. To stay along with that, forklift traffic is a major concern for most of these warehouses. And for this particular example here, this is a loading dock ramp where the forklifts are constantly coming out from the yard and going up this ramp and into the warehouse. It's their only means of access. So in order to repair this ramp, it could not be shut down during their business hours. They had to have it open or else they wouldn't be able to survive. So what happened here is over time, the concrete all broke apart and they put this Band-Aid on it. They put a little metal plate here to where they would allow it to be able to stay open, right? Well, what happened is we came in, if you look on the right-hand side down here, we took the ramp out, we completely grinded it all down, cleared out all the old concrete, and we used our Belzona 4000 series right here. Now, AJ alluded to a little bit earlier that with concrete, you can't feather it down to a 0. Well, with Belzona, you can. We were able to feather this down right here. So before, when you take a look back at the left, you had your forklift drivers, loads were spilling. They were dropping material that were on the forklifts because of the bumpiness. But most importantly was a safety concern. The forklift drivers, throughout the constant driving of back and forth all day long, their backs were getting beat up. They were getting some bumps and bruises, and it's a safety concern. Well, Belzona solved that safety concern by using our Belzona 4000 series right here, feather it down to a 0. And we also put on a little yellow safety feature right here because people do walk up and down this ramp at times. We're going to stay along the lines with forklift traffic here. And inside warehouses, most of you that are viewing today have probably been inside warehouses. They're enormous. They're huge. There's concrete everywhere. Well, what do you do when all that concrete starts to fail and starts to break apart? You know, concrete for concrete's not the answer, especially if you're like this customer right here that we're going to show you. This customer could not be shut down for any length of period of time. They had to stay open. It was very important. But again, when you look at this picture on your left-hand side, forklift traffic constantly going over these grooves here gets beat up on the forklift drivers, calls it a safety concern. And also you had load spilling and things like that. So this called for a much bigger repair than just concrete. It needed a think big Belzona solution. And you want to talk about selling ice to Eskimos? This repair right here is done in a cement plant. We have been doing work at this plant for the last decade. Every couple of months we go back, we fix a few other areas that have broken, and yet our repairs still hold true a decade later. This repair right here, we chipped out all the old concrete, we roughed it all up, we got all the loose material out of there, and we put in, again, our Belzona 4000 series to give it a nice smooth finish. And we feathered it down to a 0. I know if you look right here, it looks like it might not be even and level. It's a little bit of an optical illusion with our picture, but this is a completely smooth surface to where your drivers can now go back and forth. Again, you talk about cure time. We went in on this site on a Friday afternoon, cleaned out all the old concrete. On Saturday morning, we put in our Belzona 4000 series, and this cement plant was fully operational come Monday morning at 5 a.m. when they opened. The Belzona video that you watch, it alluded to the fact that Belzona has excellent adhesion for vertical applications with no formers. That's amazing, okay? And this example that we're going to go over right now is a vertical application in an underground water tank. And, you know, a standard concrete repair wouldn't be used for this because it's porous. And over time, this would have just kept happening over and over and over again. And that's the definition of insanity. So in order to combat that, we needed a think big Belzona solution. What we did was our team came in, we cleaned out all the old concrete, chipped it all away, exposed the rebar, cleaned it all up, and we actually hand-packed, again, on a vertical application, we hand-packed in here our Belzona 4000 series, okay? Gave it a nice smooth finish here, and this is the underground water tank. This tank was fully operational within 48 hours. On a normal concrete repair, it would have been weeks to fully cure. The video also shows a picture where it's a chemical attack. And this is a prime example of a think big Belzona solution for a chemical attack on a concrete repair. This is a sulfuric acid tank, okay? Typically, a driver would pull up into here, unconnect his hose, connect it back to this valve, and take the product from the tank, from the truck, into the tank here, okay? Well, what happened here was just a little bit of a human error issue here. The driver mistakenly pulled away from the tank while it was still filling up and never disconnected the hose. So they had sulfuric acid spilling everywhere, and it caused what you see right here on your right-hand side of your screen. It completely ate away the concrete, chipped it all up, and destroyed it. When you take a look at what I'm showing you right now, this is the same thing that was in our video a little bit earlier. You see us pouring sulfuric acid on a regular cinder block and sulfuric acid on the Belzona coated. Belzona has an excellent epoxy that will solve this problem here. So what we did was we chipped out all the old concrete. We put in our Belzona 4000 series. And then as you see this maroon and red color right here, we actually put in our Belzona coating called 4311 to really give it that finish. And if you go back, if this were to happen again, and we hope from human error it doesn't, but if this were to spill again or leak or any fashion, it would be fully contained without having what's looked on your right-hand side right here. This is a concrete repair at a local South Jersey hospital. This is near their main entrance here, and a lot of visitors and some patients, constantly use this ramp here, these stairs, to go into the hospital and visit. The design for this stairs called for illumination of electrical lighting here at nighttime, and at nighttime it was very aesthetically pleasing. It looked really nice. You had all these lights going up and down these steps. But what didn't happen was the very first winter, the freeze thaw happens, and AJ spoke about that earlier. And if you look down here, you're going to see some cracking of these lights. Water actually penetrated behind the concrete. It started popping out these light fixtures and breaking them all apart. So what we had to do is we came in, we chipped out all the light fixtures here. These stairs were 5 months old. We chipped out all the light fixtures, got them down to nice and clean. We put in our Belzona 4000 series right here. And then again, because I just mentioned that they needed something aesthetically pleasing, we actually put a top coat over here because it's a high traffic area. And it's not your typical industrial facility where you may not care about the aesthetic looks of it, but this was a hospital main entranceway. They wanted it to look nice and uniform. So put a little top coat on here to make everything look nice for them. This application is very unique. This is actually at a South Jersey casino. It's their beer cooler, and inside this room, it stored nothing but beer. And if you're ever a bar back, you know that when kegs are empty and things like that, you're not being very cautious with handling an empty keg. You're taking it, you're throwing it, you're disconnecting the tap, throwing the kegs, moving all over. And over time, this tile and concrete floor started getting beat up left and right. And as you can see, underneath this tile floor and cement floor was a sand bed. Over time, it became an impact resistance and a major health concern for this casino because the beer, the old stuff, was just saturating inside the sand bed. This called for a Belzona Think Big solution. We came out, we chipped it all up, we cleared out all the old tile, all the old cement, and the entire sand bed. What we did was, if you look here on your left-hand side, you'll see we used our Belzona 4000 series to replace all the old concrete. On top of that, we then put a top coat on with our 5000 series. And if you pay attention to the edges here where the laser pointer is going, you're going to see we actually used our 2000 series elastomeric product to give it a nice long finish. By getting rid of all the old tile, all the old concrete, and the sand bed, and by using Belzona, we made this impact resistant, non-porous, and extremely cleanable for the casino. This is the last one that I'm going to go through with folks today, and it's called our Belzona Smooth Ride Expansion Joint Repair. This is found typically primarily in hospitals. And for those of you, most of you that are viewing today, you've probably been inside a hospital. As you walk down the hallway, you see these metal expansion joints that run from wall to wall, the entire width of the hospital. Most are about 8 feet in length, your standard hospital hallway. Well, what happens is as you look at that, there's cause for concern here because your traditional metal expansion joint has a little raised lip and it can cause a trip, slip, or fall, right? But there's a bigger question associated with this, and that question is what lies beneath? Well, I'm going to show you what lies beneath. When you take a look at this image here, you're going to see this is your typical metal expansion joint. Over time, the metal expansion joint and where the concrete and tile meet will eventually crack apart and fail. When people are mopping up the hallways, okay, the water, things like that will spill and go underneath these metal expansion joints. If you're in an operating room and there's a surgery or procedure, there's some cleanup that has to happen in there, right? What we've found is when we remove these metal expansion joints, we found some pretty nasty things. We found bloody rags, we found needles, and we found gauze pads. We've even found cigarette butts underneath these things. Underneath the metal expansion joints, it serves as a petri dish for mold and bacteria. And hospitals are all about clean air, so we have a solution to that problem. It's called our Belzona Smooth Ride. And it's made up of a bunch of different Belzona products from our 4000 series to our 2000 series. And we can give it a nice smooth finish here. I'm going to show you the final image here. This is what our Smooth Ride expansion joint looks like at the end. As you can see, it's nice and smooth. It's feathered down to a 0. You know, the hospital gurneys, the wheelchairs, the hospital beds can go over that without having any slip, trips, or falls. But more important, it's a smooth finish that is tied right to the tile. It's completely sealed and prevents moisture penetration from seeking beneath that. Folks, I'd like to thank you for joining our webinar today. I'm going to bring back on Aria Chambers here and AJ Patel. We're going to go over some final takeaways and some Q&A.
All right, thank you so much, everybody, for a great presentation. Just some key takeaways from this webinar. Belzona provides permanent solutions for concrete repair that are fast curing, chemical resistant, and have a higher compressive strength. Be sure to reach out to us to schedule your concrete inspection today. You can reach out to Jason Klein or AJ Patel so that they can connect you with a representative who can do that inspection for you. And be sure to visit our websites, which are listed below. Our next webinar is going to be on stair and platform solutions to navigate your facility. And we'll have a date for that coming up soon. Just be sure to stay tuned to our socials for that date. And if there was anything else that the panelists wanted to add, feel free to do so now.
Yes, Ari, you mentioned our previous webinar, so I would just urge the audience here that on our website, we have a whole host of our most recent webinars we've done over the last few months at our Knowledge Center. So as Aria sends us out, please feel free to take a look. Any questions, reach out right away. We want to be a solutions to any of your facility problems.
Awesome.
I think the only thing I got is everybody go out and enjoy this awesome weekend.
All right, with that, I'm going to wrap up our webinar. Thanks everybody for attending. Thank you, Jason and AJ, for your presentation, and be sure to look out for an email from me within the hour.
Excellent.
Thank you again.
See you later, everybody.